Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Seth, psychologist, here with Psychologist commentary about the new Netflix documentary about the actor Charlie Sheen. This is a two-part Netflix documentary called AKA Charlie Sheen, and boy, this documentary is a lot. It covers a lot of ground. There is so much one could talk about in offering commentary about this documentary. I'm actually just going to talk about several different points from a psychological perspective that I found really interesting. Let's just start off with when he was young growing up. There are, I think, a couple of things that make his upbringing really salient. And one of them, of course, is that he was born into an entertainment family, born to a very famous father. Not just that, but also that he was exposed to alcoholism in his father. His father had significant alcohol struggles. And also, Charlie Sheen in the documentary talks about this effect on him, what it was like to see his father sick. There's some really interesting coverage on the set of Apocalypse Now. And so, watching the documentary, of course, one watches this and thinks about kind of how some of these experiences could have impacted the life of a young person growing up. The documentary also shows coverage of what you could see as a really brewing, blossoming performer personality in Charlie growing up. This kid was a performer, had a big personality from the start. So there's that. Personality, of course, determines later in life so many of the behaviors that a person engages in, the types of relationships they seek out, sometimes the type of work that they seek out. One of the overarching themes that I saw in the documentary was this sense of what I would call near misses, these sort of situations where things could have gone either way. They could have gone really bad or they could have gone well earlier in his life in sort of young adulthood, certainly when we talk about his Hollywood career. And, there were situations where it could have gone terribly, but actually, just in the nick of time, he made it, or he ended up succeeding, or he got a lucky break. So there was this sense of near misses, this sense of, the scale. It could have tipped one way or the other. And in his early adulthood, things really seemed to go well for him in many ways. He missed things really going terribly in some ways earlier on. And some of the successes that Charlie had in Hollywood really can't be denied. It's not just the success of Two and a Half Men and all the different salary negotiations that, he talks about in the documentary, ending up causing him to just make an astronomical amount of money from that show. There's not just that. There are so many successful film appearances that he had. What really was just a huge commercial success with the Hot Shots series, a critical role in Ferris Bueller's Day Off that in some ways, really, when we look back on it, is really iconic. He really showed in that scene. I thought that scene was great, that the documentary focused on it with Jennifer Grey. Just this sense of irreverence in that scene. You could really sense he really just kind of embodied, or I would suggest kind of oozed this irreverence. It's interesting when we think about that psychologically, when we think about actually the fact that in life, a lot of emotional success in life is actually about things that are just as basic as showing up, respect for laws, respect for protocols, respect for, people. So it makes you think about that irreverence and what it must be like psychologically to be so rewarded in your career for coming across as irreverent, as really not caring, when actually it is reverence and caring that matters so much in one's personal life. So there was sort of that dichotomy that you could see from the very beginning. A couple points that I want to make about, and actually, as I do that, I'm thinking this reminds me because I'm going to talk about a plane. The way somebody, a flight attendant, points on an airplane. Is it like two fingers or three fingers when they point towards the lavatory? But here I go with my 2 points that I want to make, though, about the issue related to him talking about flying a plane. Boy, that was a really fascinating scene when he talks about basically a pilot on a commercial airliner that he was on. I think he was flying to or from Asia to do a work role. And the pilot, because of Charlie Sheen's fame, ends up allowing Charlie Sheen to fly the plane. This is at least according to Charlie Sheen's story, but allows him to fly the plane not on autopilot. So this is important, I think, because it shows psychologically two perspectives that we really have to think about if we're going to really think about the life, the personality of Charlie Sheen. One is what the impact is on a person when other people treat them like they are gods, when other people basically allow people to do things that they wouldn't allow other people. Would anyone else on that plane have been allowed to fly the plane? And should they have been? We see that behavior and we think that's absolute insanity. Well, if somebody is as famous as Charlie Sheen was, obviously they are treated in some ways as if they walk on water, that the rules don't apply to them. Is that good, though, for a person? So, in some ways, when you look at a life like Charlie Sheen's that went off the rails, well, one of the things we see is, well, hold on. There are so many yes people around them that really enabled them to see themselves as somebody where the rules don't apply to them, that they are so special and different. And yet, at the end of the day, when they go home, when the audiences stop clapping, when the film set is over, they're not that special. They are just like anyone else. And we all are human beings, sort of left with some of the same frailties and strengths, just the mix that we all deal with. So it's a confusing experience, I believe, psychologically for someone to be that famous, to be treated like they walk on water when they don't. So that's one thing that I thought we see in the scene about him flying the plane. The other is just the element of thrill seeking. Even now, in retrospect, in the documentary, when you see Charlie Sheen talking about the experience of getting to fly that plane, you can see that sort of like that glimmer of that thrill seeking in his eyes. Well, thrill seeking is actually really important to think about from a psychological perspective. And actually, Martin Zuckerman of the University of Montreal identified this thrill seeking as a personality trait. And actually, he created a sensation seeking scale, okay, to determine where individuals fall on a continuum of those who seek out intense experiences and those who avoid them. There are actual psychologists who created thrill seeking scales. Why? Because it matters. Some people, some personalities actually flirt with that level of intensity in their behavior more than others. What's interesting, a subset of people thrives in environments, okay, that are overwhelming and frightening to others. Overwhelming and frightening to others. So, when through the documentary we see so many different ways in which Charlie Sheen was in risky situations, sexual behavior, aggressive behavior, criminal behavior, we can really make sense of that word thrill seeking and being in frightening environments. So, what research would suggest that there is a personality component, that doesn't just come out of thin air for someone who finds themselves seeking out situations like that. It actually relates to a broader personality type a lot of times. Well, there is, like I said, a lot of ground covered in this documentary. A lot of the big issues are covered in detail. The addiction is really clear. I thought there was one line that he said in the documentary that was especially powerful when he said it. He said, at some point, the party was over. I just didn't know it yet. And yet he kept seeking. He kept pursuing that sort of mood, stimulation, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. The pot of gold, though, that never exists. He never could make it last. Seeking that high, seeking those sensations. Of course, it was synthetic. He was choosing it with substances. But he kept looking for the party for years, even though, like he said so eloquently, the party had ended. He talked about the extent of the addiction. He talked extensively about smoking crack. He talked extensively about some of the sexual behavior that led to. He also talked just about some of the extreme medical issues that he dealt with. He talked about being HIV positive. I thought it was interesting to see some of the footage of his father, Martin Sheen. And when he spoke, when Charlie spoke about his father, I think you could really sense something different in his eyes. You could really sense a seriousness. You know, when he talks about his father, there was a very complex relationship there. You could also sense from his father just the degree of investment and care and love that he had in his son. In the documentary, you also get interviews from Denise Richards, his wife at one point. She struck me, first of all, as so down to earth. It also showed me, boy, she sure knows how to curse. And at the same time, I wonder if maybe she feels the need to curse in a really unadulterated way after all of the emotional intensity that she talked about having been through. I thought it was important, some of the comments that she made, talking about her past relationship and just some of the extreme chaos that she experienced living with Charlie Sheen. And at one point, she said something to the effect of, well, Charlie, he became a little aggressive. And then she made a reference to taking a baseball bat and smashing televisions. I really thought about how is this minimizing some of the extent of any aggressive behavior or violent behavior? And that is something that is seen often in individuals who are in relationship with someone who's violent in a home. There is a lot of times for the people close to them a tendency to minimize it. Why? A lot of times there's still fear that their own central nervous system, in some ways, is still afraid, sometimes having been around that degree of aggression or violence. So it's very common a lot of times for people in close relationship with aggressive people to still minimize it, even to this day. Now, whether she's doing that, only she can answer. I think anybody watching the documentary will be struck by just how honest he is, how willing he is to be open about his life experiences. There is no question. I think that it takes a lot of bravery for him to be so honest, to be so forthright. One could certainly feel there are incredible stigmas around a lot of the issues that he was talking about. He seems on some level to have made peace with it, to have accepted that this is his past. And he talked extensively about just basically trying to do better today, right? And that is a goal that each one of us can focus on. We can't change the past. What can we do today? So I think that's really important. He did say something about shame that I bet a lot of people will take with them having watched the documentary. He said, shame, it can also turn into someone's North Star. That is a beautiful quote. And I think that there's probably a lot of wisdom in that, that it's true. One can take experience of shame and learn from it and grow from it. And it sounds like he is really trying actively to do that. One of the most psychologically poignant elements of the entire documentary was from an interview with John Cryer. And that was interesting. John Cryer, of course, was his co star in Two and a Half Men. And we need to remember that during some of Charlie Sheen's really incredible emotional challenges that he was dealing with, that show was still running. And so when we're talking about a show, a TV show, there are often hundreds of people's jobs who depend on it. It is a machinery with start times and end times. So this really impacted a lot of people. And I thought you could see that in the interview when John Cryer was talking about him. But one of the things that John Cryer said in talking about Charlie was he said it kind of like this: you want to like him. And the way he said it was almost as if there was just an enormous but. You want to like him, but. And what I gleaned from that was just this really kind of complex, maybe sort of conflicted feeling that he had about Charlie. And I also thought about Denise Richards, his wife. And when she was interviewed, she at one point said, I still love him. But boy, the way she said it, the look on her face, it was a complex, mixed, nuanced emotional expression. There were a lot of different feelings in her face that shone in her eyes when she said that she still loves him. I wondered, well, how? How exactly? What is the love? You could tell it was love with an asterisk. It was a complex kind of love. Just like I thought John Cryer's statement about you want to like Charlie, want had an asterisk too. It was quite complex too. Which brings me to a point that I think is important that we can all take psychologically from this documentary, from looking at someone's life, someone who's being so honest about their experiences. It would be very easy for anyone to judge it. And yet, I don't think judgment of another person is helpful in any way. So, what can we take from it? What I took from the complex expressions, the complex way that I sensed that Denise Richards and John Cryer were talking about Charlie Sheen, is that these were individuals who didn't just care about him or have a friendship with him or know him. They didn't just love him in a way that a lot of different types of people can love a person. They were interdependent with him. Interdependent. And when two people are interdependent, they need each other for different reasons. If I'm interdependent with you, I need you to show up at these times. I need you to be reliable. The system doesn't work. The system can't function properly unless there is consistency and reliability when two people in a system are interdependent with each other. Just like Denise Richards was, of course, interdependent in a family, in a marriage, in a family that needs to run smoothly or else it breaks down. Just like John Cryer, a part of the system on a show that he was interdependent with Charlie with. That system needs every element, especially Charlie Sheen, to be reliable, to show up. And so, yes, if people do have complex feelings later about people not showing up, not being there, not being present, it makes sense if they feel conflicted or complex about that person. Why? Because when you are interdependent with someone, it's a whole other level of possible emotional and psychological toll that person, that relationship can have on you. But overall, even as I'm just kind of reviewing some points, it's exhausting even just to think and talk about because this is someone who has had a very big life. Charlie Sheen has had a very big life. And one can watch this and think, maybe too big of a life? Can some lives become too big, too much to manage, too much sensation, too overwhelming? And obviously, some of the scenes that we see in this documentary suggest that the answer could be yes. Here's what I would suggest as a psychologist, that for someone who has emotional struggles, there's something a lot of times to be said for having a simpler life. Just having a simpler life for anyone can have incredible value. Valuing the simpler things like relationships and feeling rooted to things, connection, that there's value in a simpler life. But I would say, especially for someone who has emotional challenges, having a simpler life is often one of the most important things they can seek out. I'm Dr. Seth, psychologist, and if you haven't had a chance, check out this documentary on Netflix.